So, you just bought your new Sprinter van, eh?
Sure did, narrator. That sort of sounds like me.
So you must be getting ready for that first epic road trip, huh?
H-E-double yeah.
Well, I hope you planned something to pass the time other than a dope playlist.
Wait, what? Why is that?
Well, everyone but you knows that the stereo system in a Sprinter is a giant pile of shit.
What? We paid for the premium audio package. Colleen, show this voice in the sky what's up and play some Britney.
You got it.
It's Britney.
No, turn it off! Turn it off! It hurts! I think my ears are bleeding. Wait. No, it's just ketchup. What is up, my dudes and dudettes? We are back. Behind that camera is Colleen and I am Todd, and today we're going to be tackling part one of our audio system install. We have two major components going in the van today, both of which we picked up on the Crutchfield open box sale, which is always nice to save a few Benjamins. First up is the made in France Focal Flax Evo PS165 F3E three-way component speaker system. Wow, that is a mouthful. I originally saw these installed on a Benchmark Vehicles van, and I fell in love with the concept and had to have them in ours. To power these puppies, we went with the JL Audio RD900/5. It's a 900 watt amp, 5-channel that fits perfectly under our passenger seat. Anyways, let's cut the chit chat and go ahead and get these installed. All right, it is a wee bit blustery up on the hill today, so hopefully we can hear this over the wind noise. We're gonna go ahead and upgrade the speakers in the door here. We have already removed the panel and we've already properly sound deadened this thing. Both of those videos are on our channel if you're interested in checking that out to see how we did it. The first step of this process is running brand new audio cables. We're going to be using oxygen-free copper cables, or OFC as the PROs call it, so let's go ahead and see what it's going to take to make that happen. If you've watched our channel before, you probably noticed we are big fans of serviceability. For this particular install, we are using XT60 bullet connectors for all of our speaker disconnects. We soldered these, being sure to take note of the plus and minus orientations, and used high-quality marine-grade shrink tubing to cover each of these connections. It's not very custom to have boring-ass speaker wire routed through your van, so we covered ours in this braided sleeving, which also adds some additional protection. And to stop the ends from fraying, we capped them with another piece of shrink tubing. Finally, we used our trusty Brady M210 with a shrink tubing cassette to label each of our audio cables. Remember, serviceability is key. To run the speaker cable through to the door, you can pull off the rubber boot and then remove the massive connectors inside the resulting cavity. Back up in here, there's a piece of foam that you need to pull out, just a little bit, and then you can get the wire through. Then you can snake the wire through the boot and into the door cavity. I used a small screwdriver to hook the end of the connector, finally pulling it through where it needed to be. These plastic rings are pretty difficult to get out, and they're pretty easy to break. I actually broke one on the other side. Basically what you need to do is take a trim removal tool, and where there's a little cutout like this, you gotta work your trim removal tool in between the metal and this piece, and you want to push this tab down. All you need to do is get 2 of them and it will pop out, but do not pull because you will break this thing. And then once this is out, there's like a little groove on here. There's a corresponding little tab on the boot that those need to go together in order to push back in. Once the plastic ring and boot are reunited like old high school friends, you can restuff the massive connectors back into the body panel cavity and reunite the reunited assembly and panel opening like a pair of long-lost lovers. I then routed the new speaker wire along the same path as the factory speaker. There's a panel-mounted zip tie that I cut and replaced with the same zip ties we used from our wire rerouting video. I trimmed the end of the zip tie with our super handy Klein D275-5 cutters and then finally decommissioned the factory speaker wire with a piece of hush tape out of the way.
Because the door speakers in a Sprinter van mount directly to the door panel, it's important to also sound deaden the large flat plastic areas. I used some of the Silas 80mm deadener that we had left over. I then removed the factory door speakers using a T20 Torx bit to ultimately put them where they belong, in the trash. Since the new Focal woofers going in the door are quite a bit deeper overall than the factory speaker, we needed to trim some plastic. I found using a set of calipers set to the desired removal distance was the best way to mark this consistently. Then using a brand new uber sharp razor blade, I slowly cut through this ring along this line. The Focal speakers are also slightly larger in diameter as well, so I needed to also remove any additional plastic to this depth completely out to the mounting posts. Here's a side-by-side of the factory speakers and the new Focal flex speakers. The Focal speaker weighs in at 1.29 kg, where the stock speaker is only 242 grams. You can tell these things are meant to move some serious air. The Focal speakers are slightly deeper and have a different bolt pattern, so to account for this, we had to machine a custom CNC adapter ring out of ABS that will attach to the speaker like so. Wait, did I just say CNC? I guess that means it's time for a machine shop minute. So technically that was only a machine shop 30 seconds, but the adapter rings turned out beautifully and fit nice and snug down into the spot we cleared for them. Then I simply held it all together and finished this install with the factory T20 screws. See these little orange clips? They tend to jiggle around a little bit, and since these new speakers push about 100 times the amount of air as the stock ones, it's important we take as many anti-rattling measures as we can. In this case, we cut a piece of hush tape to adhere it to the top of each one to remove the wiggle and the plastic on plastic contact. Next up was the insulation. This 3M Thinsulate acts as not only a temperature insulator but also a sound insulator and will significantly improve the overall quality of how your sound system will perform. We cut and trimmed and cut and sprayed with 3M90 to get things set. Then the door panel went back on, we connected up our XT60 connectors, and because we hate those rattles, we finally wrapped the connector in speaker cloth, securing it all in place with Tessa tape. All right, so not so funny story. When we were putting this door panel back on, we actually broke this tiny little white clip you see here. This is called a door rod locking clip. It's what attaches the handle to the door lock mechanism. Luckily, our friends at the Mercedes-Benz shop in Santa Rosa had these, but only because Mr. Ben Savanstorm ordered these back in May and didn't pick them up. So if you're watching this, Ben, we really appreciate you. Thanks for doing that for us. We are on the passenger's side here, and we literally just wrapped up the A-pillar and mounted the speakers, and I think it looks pretty good. If you want to see how we made the killer pillar on the driver's side, go ahead and stay tuned for this next part. If not, we always put the chapter markers in the description below, so go ahead and skip ahead if that's what you're into. Steps to make a killer pillar. Step number 1. Remove the pillar following the instructions in our headliner removal video, and then spend the next 4 to 6 hours trying to peel off the stock fabric while cussing non-stop under your breath. For absolute real though, this part is a bit of a pain, but I'll let you in on a little secret. Do not separate the fabric layers. I did this on the first one and it was at least 1,000 times worse. If you keep them together and make sure they stay together, it's not so bad. For instance, this second one took me about 10 minutes in total, and if any part of the fabric started to tear from the other, I would use something sharp like a flathead screwdriver to get things corrected. For the heart and soul of this particular project, we fashioned up a nifty 3D printed part that formed the basis for our speaker locations and the overall shape. Next, we used this to mark the speaker locations on the pillar, and using our trusty circle center method pictured in the animation here to mark where we needed to drill. I used the closest hole saws I had to these sizes. The larger hole got a little bit rowdy because of the extra torque and larger teeth, where the small one, since I had a fine-tooth hole saw, cut like Paula Deen's favorite food, booter. I then hot glued the 3D printed piece to the pillar and used a Dremel to ensure the holes were the exact same size. Then, using a piece of fabric I cut from an old polyester t-shirt, I hot glued it down along a line that I drew to blend the pillar and the 3D printed part together. To cut off the excess material, I found using an X-Acto knife slicing straight through the middle of the hot glue bead to work best. With the fabric removed, I went around all the edges with super thin superglue or cyanoacrylate, CA for short, and with a quick spritz of the activator, this helps lock everything into place prior to fiberglassing. Since polyester resin doesn't bond that well to plastic, I drilled a bunch of small holes around the edge of the fabric. With any luck, the resin will seep through these and create a mechanical bond rather than relying on adhesion alone. I'm using US Composites 435 layup resin. This stuff is pretty nasty. You'll want to use in a well-ventilated space with gloves, a serious respirator, and mix the MEK according to the instructions provided. Using a cheap chip brush, I applied the mixed resin to the t-shirt material, making sure it was completely saturated. I also made sure to cover all the holes I drilled along the edges. I let the pillar cure overnight, and then the next morning prepped some 1 1/2 ounce chopped fiberglass mat. One piece I cut as a front face template, where the rest I pulled small 3x3 inch chunks of chopped mat off the main sheet. I mixed up some more resin and then dabbed. Not the dance move only your father still does, but the fiberglass with a saturated brush. I built up 2 full layers before allowing it to cure overnight again. Fast forward to the next day, and I used a Dremel with a cutoff wheel to clean up the edges, and then switched over to a pointed aluminum oxide grinding stone for the detailed work around the speaker openings. I feathered this in to give it a nice radius transition between the two. I then sanded the larger surfaces with an orbital sander using 120 grit sandpaper until they were smooth as a baby shark. Do 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 do. I apologize in advance if that song is stuck in your head for the rest of the day. Anyways, it's time to mix up some high quality lightweight body filler. I went with USC's Featherite. I mixed in the hardener according to the instructions using this awesome mixing board I found on Amazon called Clean Sheets. Apparently it pays for itself within the first week of use, and I believe them. Anywho, I smeared the filler on with the included spreader like cream cheese on a bagel to start building the overall shape I wanted. Remember when I said it's important to use a high quality filler? The thing that separates a good filler from a bad one is you can actually start to sand a good filler before it's fully dry, and this saves a ton of time and a ton of work sanding things to the final shape. Also, using a block sander helps keep things smooth. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a donut without glaze? It's actually not that good, and body filler is kind of the same thing. The final glaze is the icing on this cake. The ultra light, ultra smooth, ultra spreadable, ultra sandable, ultra filler that finishes it all off so things look, well, ultra nice. We searched far and wide for the stock fabric to no avail, so we decided to do what the Italians do and wrap these puppies in charcoal alcantara using DAP weldwood adhesive. We coated both the back side of the fabric and the front of the pillar with a generous amount and allowed them to dry to the touch before bonding commenced. This adhesive is no joke. Once it's bonded, there is no way you're getting it apart, so you really want to take your time here. You need a lovely assistant or a friend to hold it up on each end while one person starts from the middle, slowly working your way to the outer edges. Unfortunately, we ran out of space on the memory card and we were in way too deep to stop and fix the situation. I used the back end of an X-Acto knife to really push the fabric into the speaker cavity, and then a pick tool to poke the holes through. The last step was mounting the mids and the tweeter. Or are these just called X's now? Sorry, a little Elon Musk Twitter joke there for you. For the mid speaker, I designed the holes into the 3D print to mount with screws, where the tweeter I designed it to be a press fit. Both fit beautifully, and as I slap on this speaker grill, I am calling this one done. I mounted the crossovers for the speakers under the cup holders and tore apart the entire dash to make it easier to run the wires. Unfortunately, I didn't record the disassembly, but thanks to advances in movie editing magic, was able to reverse the assembly process for you fine folks. So let's get into it. Start by removing the cup holders. This is done with clips only, so get under it with a trim tool and pull up. Next, I remove the driver's side floor mat. Then I remove this driver's side piece. There are screws, clips, and my dash layout had 3 connectors. If you would like a full detailed video of this removal process, let me know in the comment section below. Next up is the passenger side floor mat. This comes up in 2 pieces. The first piece is in the footwell that has 2 quarter-turn fasteners, and then the large piece after that. Once that's removed, you can then pop off the fuse box cover. There's this little upper trim piece here you need to pop off before you can move on to the lower trim piece that's held on with a screw into the floor and some pop rivets up in the footwell. From here you can remove the glove box, which is held on by 8 screws.
It is time for a Todd tip.
It's a Todd tip!
Now, one of the things that can be challenging when tackling a project like this and you're ripping off these panels all willy-nilly is keeping track of the fasteners. One method that's worked especially well for us is that we take each of the fasteners, we put them in a bag immediately, and then we tape them to the component that they came from. One of our TikTok followers was joking that these look like little drug bags. I don't know where you're getting your drugs from, but these work really well for fasteners, and it really helps us retrace our steps and remember how everything goes back together.
This step probably made me the most anxious, but trust me, the HVAC controls do pull off with enough force and are only held on by clips. Alright, we are getting close now. This bottom piece is fastened to the floor with screws and then only plastic clips across the top section. We made it! Last piece comes off with a couple screws and then some clips along the top. There were in total 3 electrical connections for my van in here as well. I mounted the crossovers to a piece of starboard, into which I added 2 threaded metal inserts. This will get mounted up under the cup holders using these 2 screw holes in the middle, like so.
Ooh, wow! Ah.
We labeled all the wires on this end as well. I'm going to say this again and again, this sort of thing is so important for serviceability. I didn't use any ferrules or spades for these connections. I simply tinned the ends of the wire with solder and fastened everything down nice and tight, like the lid on the jar of salsa I had to open for Colleen the other day.
All right, we just finished wiring these crossovers. We ended up putting them in this location here under the cup holders. There's a butt ton of space under those suckers, so no issues at all. We used a piece of starboard, which is fancy HDPE, and we mounted it to the frame members and then the crossovers to that. We went ahead and covered all our wires in this braided jacket, and then of course we labeled them all. I think it looks really tidy and it's super serviceable. The only thing we have left to do is to run the signals from the head unit, but I thought this was pretty neat, so I thought I'd talk about it. This bracket is actually used for a manual transmission if you order the Sprinter that way. They put it in the auto anyways, probably just to keep things modular. But that mounts here, and then this foam plug right here, that's where it would go down to connect to the transmission.
And here's a quick shot with the center dash plastic back on so you can see how much clearance and space we have. For the amplifier mount, I specifically picked an amp that could power our speakers and fit under the passenger seat above our heater install. For the mounting, I also used starboard here. One of the nice things about this material is it's marine grade and can be cut with normal woodworking tools. Since I don't have a CNC this large, I made a bunch of small templates for key areas and curves and positioned those based on full-scale CAD drawings. Then using cutting tools like hole and jigsaws, removed a majority of the material and then came back with a top bearing guided router bit along those templates to clean things up. The last step was to make this super jank DIY router table with a rounding bit to knock down all the hard edges. This also helps make it seem like a much more finished and refined part. For actually mounting this plate in the seat box, we have an ABS support block which we machined to the appropriate angle and is held on by 3 button head fasteners. All the holes in the plastic block also have these metal inserts for a strong, reliable thread. And then in the rear, since we have this nice large flange, we went with these stainless steel standoffs. Sometimes things don't always work out as you planned. My original idea here was to have this beautiful custom pass-through and cable management system. I spent the time on the design and manufacturing, and when I got everything mounted, I decided access to the heater without taking the entire amp apart was more important. So I would end up chucking that aluminum chunk in the recycling bin and cut away a large portion of this mounting board instead. That's the thing about these projects. Try not to get too attached to any one workstream. Things can change, and it's up to you to navigate those decision points for an overall better outcome. Here is the final shape, and you can see I also added metal inserts for the amp attachment points. To attach this to the bracket, I am using Loctite 262 and some button head fasteners. Once the mounting board was in, I attached the JLRD 900 amp, and now it's time to wire this bad boy. For the main power, I crimped the lug on with my new Temco TH1818 and used 4 AWG wire as recommended by the JL manual. Everything is finished with adhesive-lined shrink tubing. For the connection to the fuse block, I used these slip-on ferrules held in place with shrink tubing. These are really great for making sure all the strands are held together since there are over 2,000 of them in this wire. It also protects those little strands as you tighten down the set screw in the connection block. I attached the fuse block using 3M VHB. Longer term, I plan to run switching power between this lead and my house battery system so I can run the speakers and the amp with the van parked and not drain the starter battery. But I actually need my house batteries installed for that to happen. Oh, this goes without saying. Make sure you disconnect the battery ground before you do any battery work.
We are in the box underneath the driver's seat. I've gone ahead and removed that, and what we're looking at in the back corner underneath this flap is called the EK1 terminal strip. There are 3 connections on this terminal strip. They are outlined in the body and equipment guide, which I have pulled up here. This is a fantastic resource if you're converting a Sprinter van. Terminal 1 is power when the engine is running. Terminal 2, the middle one here, is just direct connection. It's 25 amps, so you could power some small accessories off that one. And then terminal 3 is the one we're interested in. That is ignition power. So when the ignition's on, this will kick a signal out to our amplifier, which will run a wire from that terminal to our amplifier in order to turn that on.
I ran this signal wire using 14 AWG based on the amps from EK1 Terminal 3 and the total length of the wire from it to the amp. I pulled this information from a DC wire gauge table, which you should always do. Then I added a 6mm ring terminal to this wire and some marine grade adhesive lined shrink tubing to completely protect the connection. Then I installed it on the terminal we wanted, in this case T3. If you are unsure between these connections, follow the advice engineers hardly ever take. When in doubt, read the docs. Here's the factory Mercedes wiring under the tray between the seats next to the wires I just ran. Granted, I do have a lot less wires, but it's a bit of a rat's nest I wouldn't expect from them. And then here are the speaker wires and RCA cables from the head unit that end up in the passenger seat box and plug into the amp. It's wire duct closing time. I really am sorry for some of the parts in these videos, guys. Anyways, moving on, for the amp power connection, I used the same slip ferrules as the fuse block. I made sure to mark where I needed to cut and how much I needed to strip. These are really great and do a fantastic job of keeping the strands in line and protect them long term. Finally, the same as before, I use a piece of adhesive shrink tubing to cover the flange to keep them in place. For the smaller wire connections, I used an actual crimp ferrule. I bought an excellent kit from a company called Sumline that had a crimper and an assortment of ferrules in a handy little carrying case. Links for this and all the supplies in this video are in the description below. You should probably use a grounding location listed in the BEG, but for the sake of wanting to keep this as short as possible, I ground away the metal under the seat bolt with a Dremel in the shape of the lug and put plenty of conductive anti-seize underneath to protect the metal. So far, I've had no issues here. It is an absolute art to cut this braided sleeving and not have it start fraying right away. I think it was worth the extra effort when I look back on this project though. This is a custom van after all, and it should look and feel that way for things that are even hidden away under seats and behind panels. This was an ideology I picked up from my time working at Apple Computers, and I am very grateful that it has stuck with me to this day.
Here's what we got going on with the rear speakers. They come up from the passenger seat base and they go up along the B-pillar here. I'm still using these winged zip ties. These are from the wire rerouting video and they are awesome. They fit in a lot of holes on the van here and it really gives me a clean line up this B-pillar here. And then I'm going to temporarily terminate these speaker wires here. I've added the little XT60 plugs on the end, and that is because I'm still kind of figuring out this whole section. I got to run a lot of wires this direction, and I want to make sure everything integrates really nicely with the roof panels. So we're going to just stop right here, and we'll pick this up in a part 2 when we wire in the rears.
To remove the head unit, you'll first need to remove these vents. It's hard to tell what's going on here, so let's take a closer look at this operation. You can see there are these little holes on each side of the vent. This tool snakes through the front of the vent and grabs onto those holes and pulls it out. I do not recommend these particular tools that I bought from Amazon because they actually don't work that well. The main reason being it's actually pretty difficult to get one set and then get the other one in there and not lose that connection with the first one in the process. In my opinion, a better option for this tool would be something that's in a V or a U shape and has a little bit of outward springiness. That way you could compress it and slide them both in at once, get them set, and then pull. With the vents gone, you can access these two T20 Torx bit screws on both sides. Then with a pry tool and some patience, this whole assembly comes off, revealing the same number of connectors as licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop according to Mr. Owl. 1, 2, and 3. Next step is to pull out the head unit, which is held in place again by T20 Torx screws. There are a billion connectors on the back of this thing. Go ahead and remove them all. At this point, I ran the RCA cables from the amp in the seat box. Me being who I am, didn't like that the length was about 2 feet too long, so I decided to cut them to the exact size and solder on new RCA connectors.
I just want to pause right here for a moment and tell you, do not do this. Just buy RCA cables that are the exact same length. Here I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to make it totally custom, and this is a complete pain in the
Here's the signal plug, including the line level speaker outputs, which we're interested in. You need to remove this sleeve, which is done by prying up this little latch and then sliding the cover off. With the cover off, we can see the 4 larger pins that flank the row of smaller ones. These are 2, 3, 11, and 12. Those are the front speakers. If I flip this over to the back, you can see those mirrored locations are empty. This is because I have the cargo van that doesn't have a rear speaker connection, so we are going to do some work to add those.
All right, so as we mentioned, we have the cargo van, which doesn't have rear speaker outputs from the head unit, so we're adding those now. I've got these little crimp connectors here that I'm crimping on these little bits of wire that I cut from the front speaker since we decommissioned those, and I'm using this Wirefly crimper. This thing is awesome, but unfortunately these are proprietary crimps, and so I had to modify this in order to get it to work. The actual tool for this is something ridiculous like $250 or $300, so we're making do with what we got here.
I have 4 pretty nice crimps for what I'd consider a hack job. Here's a better detailed shot of the modification. I carved out the part that's supposed to bend the wings down, but what was happening was these would get totally screwed up and bind in the tool, so I came back with a pair of needle nose pliers to press those down afterward. Since my amp takes speaker line level inputs, all I needed to do was solder the RCA adapters to the wire in the head unit plug, seal these puppies up with some shrink tubing, and then clean things up a bit with our old friend the Tessa tape roll. Finally, the last thing I did to keep the RCA plugs from clanking around like dishes on a dump truck was to interweave some speaker cloth between and around them and fix it in place again with the Tessa tape. Well, that is it, folks. The head unit went back in, the touchscreen is on, and the last step is to snap the vent back in place to call this beast of a project done.
All right, friends, that wraps up another video in the Adventure Van build series. We really hope you enjoyed it, and we are very pleased with how this sound system came together. I'm not gonna lie, it sounds freaking amazing. We were cruising down the one yesterday, windows rolled down, tunes just cranked to the max, and overall it makes this van a lot more fun to drive. For part 2 of this series that will be available in the future, we are going to run another power run to our house battery system so we can toggle between the two and run the system when we are parked. We're also going to be doing the rear speakers as well and a few more other surprises, so you'll want to stay tuned for that. If you like what we're doing, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. It actually really does help us out. If you have any questions or comments, leave those in the comments section below. And if you feel so inclined on your way down there, you know what to do. Slap that subscribe button. We'll see you next time. Zip ties. These are from Zip Ties. The only thing we have left to do is to run.